You're listening to a podcast from The Word.
So, Noel Coward, Mad About the Boy, BBC documentary, which is a lot of people have been watching over the last few days. It strikes me as an interesting case of how figures from the past nowadays have to be kind of reinvented in terms of kind of contemporary reality. In that you now get a documentary about Noel Coward that leads on the one thing that people never used to talk about.
Oh, it's almost entirely about his sexuality, isn't it? Yeah, I know. I noticed that.
It's called Mad About the Boy for a start, you know. And the curious thing about Mad About the Boy is that he wrote that song for a musical, and I can't remember the name of the musical offhand, but anyway, in the musical, it's sung by a number of different women, all about the same young man that they're obsessed with. And he actually, around about this time, he'd recorded it at Abbey Road, but just for his sort of his own amusement, his own interest, with him singing it, you know. And it was never put out. It wasn't put out until years later. I don't know, the 70s or something like that.
Well, it wasn't put out presumably because it was him singing about a boy.
Well, yes, it was just kind of inconceivable that you'd have a man singing that about a boy. Whereas now, all those years later, it is the most valuable Noel Coward recording. It's the most valuable copyright, which is absolutely extraordinary.
Is it?
Yes, it is. Now, it's the one that gets trotted out because it's kind of, it's poignant, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Nowadays. Whereas it wasn't poignant at the time, you know. It was really interesting how our views in music changed and views of people. But he was absolutely extraordinary figure. I mean, talk about talent. It's just, it's
well, there's a bit very early on, isn't there, in the documentary where he's in an interview. And they said, when did you first realise that you would be a star? He said, at the age of 2.
That.
And then at the age of 12, I think he was the main breadwinner for the family. I thought that was really interesting. It changed the dynamic of your relationships with your siblings and your parents if you're the one that's earning the money. And also the fact, which I completely forgot, that they actually came from not abject poverty, but they were poor.
Humble.
They were very humble beginnings, and therefore most of his work was about not only the upper classes and the moneyed classes that he wished to join, but also the people that he wished to join being fondly lampooned. So that was interesting, wasn't it?
It was, and I think he has that in common with, somebody of a later generation, Julie Andrews, you know, who became a star by kind of cut glass renditions of musical comedy. She came from quite a humble background. Jessie Matthews, who was a huge star of British musical films of the 40s, she came from really, really poor background, you know, and that's what you did in those days. You came from very humble backgrounds and you reinvented yourself as a kind of stage aristocrat. Whereas nowadays, you get actors who come from quite wealthy backgrounds who reinvent themselves as kind of horny-handed sons and daughters of toil. You know, that's what they want to do. But he is an absolutely exceptional person. And one of the things that comes out in the film is because he couldn't read music or anything like that.
He had no idea how to, and taught himself to play. Absolutely astonishing.
And
completely natural.
When you think of the sophistication of the stuff that he did, it is just absolutely remarkable. Have you ever heard, I was just saying to my wife last night when we were watching it, and I must go out and get this record today because I don't actually have a copy of it. I think 1955, you know, so after the war, he briefly had sort of money troubles, I think. And the mob and so forth were beginning to open up Las Vegas as a huge, great gambling and resort town. And one of the ways he wanted to do it was to start attracting, you know, major showbiz talent to come and do residencies. And so he was approached to, you know, would you come and do a month or whatever at the Desert Inn in Las Vegas? And because the money was really good, so he went and did it. And
it was a huge success.
There was a recording of this. It's a live album. It's got a wonderful cover of him in a dinner jacket holding a cup of tea in a saucer, probably with his finger up, standing on a dried out mud flat near Las Vegas. Really good photograph. And there he is, just doing his act in the Desert Inn or whatever it's called in Las Vegas, and it is just utterly remarkable. How it's probably one human being, backed by a piano, doing the Stately Hands of England and Mad Dogs and Englishmen and all this kind of stuff. It's in terms of sheer accomplishment, you've rarely heard anything like it. And one of the things that I found really impressive about it, every time I've heard it, is he thanks all the technicians by name. He was that kind of old school showbiz pro that he knew it mattered like hell what the lighting man was called and how good he was at doing his job and how grateful he was for everybody who treated him really well. And it's a wonderful, wonderful album. I'm going to go out and get it probably today if you still can. But yes, Mad About the Boy. So
and interesting that the Americans kind of related to that whole act, because it must have seemed so foreign and so extraordinary and so exotic. Their understanding of the English upper classes.
Well, I suppose it sounded like their kind of fascination with Agatha Christie and certain kind of stage aspects of British life. And he'd become, he was a huge star via films like In Which We Serve and things like that, which just still pop up every year at Christmas time. And what's the one? This Happy Breeze, which I think it's on the telly at the moment. Then again, as I was reflecting the other day, what isn't on telly?
I was also struck by how risque he was really early on, because the big success when he must have been, how old would he have been? 24, 25, was The Vortex.
Yeah.
And The Vortex is about, it's about a nymphomaniac socialite and her cocaine-addicted son, played by him, in fact. And that's pretty amazing in the 1920s, isn't it? And even Brief Encounter, I felt Brief Encounter, in some ways, is quite risque, because that was made during the war. And the idea that you're doing something, looking at the idea of extramarital affairs.
But what's the amazing thing about Brief Encounter? And it's one of those films that whenever I go into a room and it's on, I just perch on the edge of the sofa.
You finish on watching the whole thing.
And watch the whole thing, because it's just absolutely masterful. The thing about Brief Encounter is they don't do it. They do not. They
try, don't they? They try.
They don't do it. Yeah. They walk away in the end.
Yeah.
That's the tragedy. And that's why you can never, I know there have been attempts to remake it since, but you can't remake it in our times, because nobody would accept that human beings would ever behave like that.
No, they do try. They go to the apartment of the friend, don't they? And he comes home early.
Yeah.
So they're foiled,
Oh, God.
No. Another thing I thought was that he seemed like a kind of early template for modern celebrity. Post-TV, people really got to understand his kind of public persona and his brilliant one-liners. And the one-liners just astonishing. And then he obviously felt completely imprisoned by the fact that everywhere he went, he had to be on as Noel Coward, didn't he?
Yeah.
And a lot of his later life was fueled by this desire to get away, to go and live in the Caribbean and to live in America and just get away from places where people expect him to be Noel Coward all day.
He used to get invited to parties, and he thought he was just being invited as a guest. But what he would find is when he got there, they expect him to be a turn.
Yeah.
And he was never quite sure how he felt about that.
No, I'm sure.
So that wonderful Noel Coward song, I've Been to a Marvelous Party, which there's a wonderful version, Neil Hannon, because there was Neil Tennant oversaw that EMI compilation about 20 years ago, again called Mad About the Boy, I think, where loads of contemporary artists did did Noel Coward songs. Neil Hannon does a wonderful version of I've Been to a Marvellous Party. And Noel Coward's original version of this, I mentioned it in my Abbey Road book, actually. It's quite a sophisticated piece of recording in the sense that it starts with him just talking. And then it turns into the song. It's as if you have interrupted him in the middle of a party, and now he's going to do a song. It's the kind of thing we got used to in recording, years later. But at the time he did it, it was quite revolutionary. But no, he was when he went to meet Churchill during the war, and he always fancied himself as being a spy, because he knew his way around. He was and
became friends with Ian Fleming, didn't he, when he was living out in
Jamaica? Yeah. And so he always wanted to be, on government service. And they were pretty much saying, well, I think you can do the most good for us by, continuing to perform and so forth. And but Churchill wouldn't let him go until he'd sung Mad Dogs and Englishmen twice.
And even once, there's a clip of him doing it, I think, in the Las Vegas show, and even once you think the sheer mental effort to remember all those lyrics and the intonations and the fall of the meter and the movement before and after the beat throughout is absolutely incredible. In Bengal, to move at all is very rarely done.
It's very rarely done, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, it's absolutely
incredible.
It's wonderful stuff. Go and see it if you haven't already.
The Word Podcast. Prime cuts of popular culture served fresh each week.
Last night, excitingly, was the final of the alumni Christmas special of University Challenge. And as regular listeners will know, David was in the team for Middlesex. And there were 12 teams originally. There was a fierce contention to get through to the semi-finals, the final four. They then triumphed at the semi-finals and were in the final last night up against Corpus Christi. Dave, the oiks from the former Polytechnic of Middlesex, the jumped-up lovies, were up against the toffs. Actually, it was like a moment in the young ones, up against the toffs from Corpus Christi. And, I won't be destroying any kind of, it won't be no spoiler to say that they won. It was a landslide victory, won by a lot. At one point, I noticed, I think there were 6 minutes to go, and I think you had 165 points, and they had something like 25. And I thought, this is fantastic. But look, tell me about the whole process of being on the inside of, we've all watched it from the outside, but on the inside, how does it feel? And how do you feel it works?
Well, it's very weird when they get in touch with you and ask you, I was just kind of tickled to be asked, but then I thought, well, I'm not going to do it, really, And
because of the risk, presumably.
Well, a load of things, really, and
because that must be everybody's fear, is that you're going to be put on, asked your kind of, you'll be put on your actual main terrain and not know the answer.
Yes, and but it was only when my wife said, "Well, they're not going to ask you again."
Yeah,
I thought, oh yes, that's true. So you're going to regret it for the rest of your life if you don't do it, So I did it, and they record it in Manchester, and they tell you who the rest of the team was. I hadn't met anybody anybody else in the team, and you go up to Manchester on the train, and you sit on the train. You think, well, I ought to prepare.
But you can't.
I ought to revise.
Yeah, for what? For electromagnetic spectrum questions.
Cannot be done. Because the only way you revise is you think, let me brush up on a few of the things I know already.
Yeah.
So in your mind, you're asking yourself questions that you know the answers to. Well, there's no point doing that, because nothing like that is going to come up. And so all anybody is thinking when they go and get started is, oh, please don't, make a fool of myself. Please don't let down the team and so forth. And so, we did the first round.
Well, I have to say, and the record should reflect, scored the most massive hit with the opening salvo. Because they had the start list for 10, don't you? And you get 3 bonus questions if you get that right. And your start of the 10 was, the answer was the Hollywood sign, wasn't it? Which you got in 7 questions. And how did they phrase the question? You got it in 7 seconds.
I can't remember the whole thing. Which landmark started as a promotion for the estate agent?
Real estate.
Real estate in 1920. Well,
that must be a fantastic
I know
feeling.
what that is.
Yeah.
I thought it was a really weird thing because I utterly confidently pressed the buzzer, never fearing for a second that I was wrong at all. It was really foolhardy confidence, really, but it was right, and so that then definitely gives you confidence going into it, because if you get a bunch of those starters right, you get confidence. B, your team gets to potentially accrue another 15 points, and C, most importantly, the other team don't score anything at all.
No, they have to sit there in agony, probably knowing the answers to something.
Absolutely. And so if you're moving forward, they're not, so that's how those margins open up, but anyway, with the first one, we were behind for quite a bit at the time, but then we just slowly must have got on some kind of streak, and we moved forward, and we ended up winning that one. And they'd, when you'd signed up to do it, they said, and if you get through, we all thought, nobody's going to get through, we want you to come back next week or whatever. Well, one of my fellow team members, he'd said, well, I can't come back because he was acting in EastEnders, so he had to be in London. And so then they bring in, every team has a fully qualified, i.e. been to the same Institute of Learning and so forth, fully qualified substitute.
Who comes up on the train to Salford, sits there
absolutely.
Sits
there and answers all the questions.
And then goes back on the train with you, unable to join in the euphoria. I mean, it's quite a weird thing, isn't it?
But in this case, David Heathcote was able to be there the following week, and he was more than adequate. He was
terrific. What a man off the bench! He did really
good, really good. So you have to go back the following week on the Saturday all the way up to Manchester and so forth, and you have to bring with you a change of top just in case you get through to the final. So we're all packed, change of top. When we arrived there, we all were joking with each other. Have you got to change your top? Not that you'll need that.
Not that you'll need it.
All that kind of stuff. And it's a very interesting piece of TV to do because it's so well established. It's been going on for so long. I can remember it from when it started in the 60s.
Yeah.
Bamber Gascoigne. I was thinking about this only the other day. I used to watch that with my late grandfather, who was, he had probably left school at 14 and was not a person to come up with tons of answers and university challenge, but he used to like watching it. And I remember one occasion when a question came up about Yorkshire cricket, and he almost had a heart attack because he knew the answer, but he couldn't quite get it out quick enough.
And you have that brief moment, you think, I should be on this.
Absolutely.
And then you suddenly sober up and think, I don't know.
But anyway, you've watched it forever. Everybody knows how it works, but they still talk you through the rules and, they make sure you understand what you can and you cannot do. And then you get you in the studio and there's your name, at your place, which is kind of funny in itself, And one thing,
the voice of Roger Tilling will shout out.
Roger Tilling.
Yeah.
Roger Tilling.
Middlesex Hepworth every time you press your buzzer.
Roger Tilling comes over and introduces himself before they begin, because he's over on the other side of the studio doing that stuff live. And then Amal Rajan says to you, if anybody feels unwell at any point, please put your hand up because we will stop. That, and they say that at the beginning of every recording because obviously it must happen.
It must happen.
It must happen.
Well, when you're suddenly told that the bonus questions are about the electromagnetic spectrum or lakes in Switzerland or whatever, you probably do feel slightly
Italian political party.
Italian political is one of the ones you got, wasn't it? Italian political party?
Yeah, I think we got one of them. I can't remember. Yeah.
Well, the one I was so impressed by was you got. There was one about a load of chemical formulas. You had to work out, they were firework combinations, and when contained in a firework, what colour would the firework be? And I think I'm right in saying you not only got the starter question right, I think you got all three of the bonuses. Partly by luck. Partly by just saying, yellow. You were told there were colours of the rainbow.
Yeah.
So yellow, green. Right.
It was definitely, there's a lot of luck. Well, there's some luck. There's some listening to the question is key thing. I'll tell you what the key skill. If anybody asked me, he said rather pompously, to account for my enormous success in University Challenge, it's this. It's this. I've set a lot of quizzes in my time. And so very often there's a clue in the way that the question is framed. That the person setting the question starts off trying to make it difficult, but then will add something that makes it a bit easier. And so I had a question that concerned Wagner at Bayreuth, I think, and the answer was Liszt. And I got that because they used the word mania.
That's right.
And
caused a certain mania. Yeah, you were thinking Listomania.
Listomania. Ken Russell's film, starring Roger Daltrey. It's all that.
Your only mistake there was when you gave your answer, you did kind of list, kind of question mark, and when you were told it was right, you went, wow. What you should have done is just gone, list, confidently. Yes. And then, even if it's wrong, it doesn't really matter. But if it's right, it looks like you knew the answer. But that was a very inspired guess. It's brilliant. But also, those bonus questions are complicated, aren't they? Because they tell you the general area that you're going to be asked about. And then within that, there are all sorts of other kind of subcategories. You've got to retain all that information in your mind before you can.
And by the time you got to the end of the question, you're very often thinking, what exactly was the thing they were asking for?
Yeah.
At the beginning of the question.
Yeah.
Because I roughly know the area, but what's the specific thing that they were looking for? And so we were behind most of the first round, but we got in front and we won. And then so we had to come back the following week and we played Bangor, and we were in the lead. I think pretty much all the way through.
Yeah, I think all the way through.
And then they said, "Well, you're now through to the final, so you're playing Corpus Christi of Oxford."
This is Michael Cockerell and various kind of eminent types.
And it's really funny when I was tweeting about this yesterday, because I was sort of promoting it without saying what happened or anything like that. Charlie Higson got in touch and said, it'll probably be like, I think he took part in one a few years ago for the University of East Anglia or whatever. He said it was all going fine till we pulled some Oxbridge crowd in the final and then got crushed. And so that was our.
And you were thinking, well, we've got an Oxbridge crowd, and
this is a
complete reverse, which must have been a thrill for the BBC actually, because that's the result you want. You want the upstarts to triumph.
I couldn't get over how that worked, because we got in front of the final, and we were in front absolutely all the way through. I think at one point we were about 50 and they were -5.
They were -5. I nearly took a photograph of the screen and I thought, I want to remember this moment. This is absolutely incredible.
Because, to be fair, they were really sweet and they were very generous, in defeat, if you can put it that way.
But it has to be said that your in particular you actually, but your team's breadth of general knowledge was fantastic. Because you were answering questions about Joan of Arc, about the Hollywood sign, about Ken Russell, Sidney Bechet, Bessie Smith. You were given a quote from "If" by Rudyard Kipling, and recognise that. Was it J. Arthur Prufrock? Was some T.S. Eliot poem as well?
It was Journey of the Magi.
That's right, Journey of the Magi. And shown a picture of William Friedkin, which I thought was quite difficult actually, even though actually he died this year. I think
he died this year. Yeah.
And then my favourite answer of yours was the answer was, I think, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court.
Yes.
Well, that's very impressive, Dave. To have done all that. We expect you to get Sidney Bechet and Jelly Roll Morton or whoever it was.
Yeah, I don't know. Yes, very often the musical stuff ends up being quite difficult because I don't know how much they can't be designing the questions for the people on the panel. But, you have a music round. There's always a music round, isn't there? There's two picture rounds, one music round. And I think the music round on the first one was here's the music of the manuscripts for the tune of various Christmas hits. You have to work out
that was fair. I mean, both you and I can read music, and we managed with my two sons here, so we managed to get two of them. One of them was "Here It Is, Merry Christmas" by Slade, wasn't it? And you were looking at those da 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 da. But I still thought it was very hard. Actually,
that was hard. That was hard.
So presumably, when you are on University Challenge and it's Christmas, which gets a huge audience, I don't know how many million are watching that, but it's going to be a massive, massive audience. Yeah, people are coming from your distant past. Must be getting in touch. Probably people you went to college with.
Yeah, you get. No, I haven't had.
Have you had any of that?
But I've had it from other people. Yeah, people get in touch from the depths of Facebook and so forth.
Yes,
I couldn't help watching this, and just kind of you discover how many people watch it because. When I was asked to do it, you were really tickled because you watch it a lot, don't you?
Well, we watch it because one of our sons and his other half are addicted, so we have a little WhatsApp thing when we watch it, and we always say, "Oh God, look at his shirt," And I'm not sure if so and so on the far right's answered anything yes, but we love it. No, we think it's fantastic.
Whereas
I also thought it was a really good thing for you to do. It's a great, but it's such a risk. Because it could have, you could have been asked something incredibly obvious and just in the heat of the moment just blanked,
Well, except you see, it's not you as an individual, is it? It's not mastermind.
No, it's not.
It's not you in the chair. It's the four of you.
Yeah.
And if you don't know, you don't volunteer or anything, So it's only when you try something and it goes wrong repeatedly. I'm sure if you guess an answer to a starter a number of times and get it wrong, that must really bother you. You must think, I'm going to shut up.
Or get two of those ones where you go in early and get it wrong and get docked 5 points and then you've taken a bullet, that's bad.
Yeah. So after we won, we had to go back to the dressing rooms and in the room next door there was Ian Wright, Gary Lineker, Alan Shearer and so forth doing Match of the Day, And they had the champagne laid out and so forth and nibbles, have a bit of a party, and we all just had to say, sorry, we're just going straight to Piccadilly Circus, get the train back, because it was during, rail.
It was a train strike the next day or something, wasn't it?
Yeah, I couldn't afford to get stuck anywhere, so there's been no opportunity to kind of celebrate with the rest of the team. Of course, we're all scattered to the four corners, really. So I don't know if there ever will be any kind of reunion. But it's I have to say I'm glad I did it.
You did absolutely brilliant decision. A triumph.
This is a junction in the word podcast. It separates that bit from this next bit.
So we're joined by Alex Gold. Hello, Alex. Where are you?
Hello there. I am in swinging Portland, Oregon, currently.
You're in Portlandia.
Portlandia, yeah.
And it's 8 rather wonderful for us. And it's what time for you? Midnight, presumably.
It's 1 minute past midnight here.
Oh right, very good. Listen, I blundered upon a secret the other day. I discovered the secret of how to listen to live albums, which you would have thought I would have known long ago. But I discovered this in the course of the other day. For some reason, I was up here in my workroom, noodling about, and I thought, I played Joni Mitchell's Shadows and Light, which is a live album from, I suppose, late 70s or something. And I've had it for years. I don't think I've played it for years. And I played it. And I thought after a while, I'm really enjoying this. It's really good. And then I realised why. I'd had 2 drinks.
Of course.
2 drinks. And it struck me, this ought to be the secret of listening to live albums. 2 drinks. Because you need to be slightly forgiving when it comes to live albums, don't you? Because they're not studio.
No, none of that precision is going to be there. Maybe you need to go the whole hog and just change into a T-shirt and a pair of trainers and stand up throughout the entire stand on a chair and punch the air.
I suppose if you have two drinks as well, you're kind of putting yourself in the mental position of someone who is at a concert who's probably had 2 drinks.
Absolutely. And also in the happy position of a person at a concert who's had 2 drinks but doesn't have to worry about how they're going to get home. Is it going to go on too long? Do they want to go to the lavatory? All those kind of things. No anxiety at all is there. But you've had the 2 drinks.
Yes, you can put the concert on hold while you go and have a wee. Perfect.
And all live albums just go over the top in one way or another, don't they? Just all of them, without exception. The solos go on a bit longer than they would do in the studio. There's more chat, There's a kind of nervous tension to the whole thing. They get a bit too excited with themselves. All those kind of things. All those kind of things that you find difficult to forgive if you're sober. Suddenly, 2 drinks, not a problem at all.
Can I take this one step further?
Go on.
And suggest that the best way to listen to live albums, and albums in general, actually, is 2 drinks. Okay, fine. I can understand that. I think you're absolutely right. But also, you should listen to them in the dark, where you have no sensory distractions at all.
Right.
So I did it with the list of albums from one of your books, Dave. Every night I would go to my room and I would turn the lights off and I would listen to one of the albums in its entirety.
Wow.
Not being able to see anything. It was the first time I heard Bob Dylan's first album and Dark Side of the Moon as well. And experiences I don't think I'll ever forget.
You're not talking about live albums, though. You're talking about albums, aren't you? You're talking about
but I think it can apply to live albums and albums in general.
But
I think if you're listening to a live album, that if you have no sensory distractions whatsoever, it's all at the privy of your imagination. You'll be transported to that venue completely. That's just my theory, anyway.
So that's just the advice I would pass on to anybody. In your collection, you've probably got a load of live albums that you haven't listened to in years. Go and have 2 drinks tonight and go and listen to one. And, but tell me I'm wrong. I don't think I am at all. 2 drinks, take with 2 drinks, absolutely anything. Humble Pie is rocking the Fillmore. Absolutely anything you want will suddenly make sense after you've had 2 drinks. That's my theory, and I'm sticking to it. So, Alex.
Yes.
Your favourite specialist subject, Liam Gallagher.
Indeed.
Is embarking on a project with John Squire. Tell us about this.
He is. He's made a secret album that's not so secret anymore. With Stone Roses guitarist John Squire. And it just occurred to me the other day that he's done the exact opposite of what his brother's done. Because I thought, well, wouldn't it be great if Noel Gallagher collaborated with Ian Brown? And I realised they did that a few years ago. And I don't know, that just struck me as quite a funny thing. But in terms of the Britpop indie world, this is big news.
Right.
It's 2 absolute titans joining forces to create possibly the greatest noise ever heard by human ears.
But no one's heard any of it yet, have they?
It can't fail to be good. Honestly, I don't think it can. I honestly don't think it can fail to be good. You've got Liam's voice, you've got John Squire's guitar.
But that's a good point, because it's a sound, isn't it? It's a particular sound.
They're both really good sounds as well, aren't they? Consistently really good sounds.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily the quality of the songwriting. It's just that sound.
It's all about the sound. I mean, the songs are secondary news, really. The songs don't really matter. It's just listening to that distinctive chiming guitar sound and Liam's vowels on the same record together. It's double the good. It can't fail.
And also, it's those constituencies, Stone Roses and Oasis, quite similar, aren't they? And mostly about nostalgia, aren't they? Mostly about trying to reactivate an experience that happened a few years ago. So that's a perfect combination.
But also there's a lineage thing as well, because the Roses was slightly before Oasis, weren't they? And they were a big influence,
on them.
Yeah.
And John Squire, didn't he play with them at one point? He played with them at
He did. He joined them. Yeah, he joined them at Nebworth for a version of Champagne Supernova that went on for, I believe, about 4 days. That was just a guitar solo as well. So there is a bit of a history there. But I really love it when these collaborations happen. You know, this is kind of stuff that you wouldn't have seen coming 20 years ago for some reason. It just wouldn't have occurred to you that a member of Oasis would have made a record with a member of the Stone Roses. I don't think.
And tell you the thing I was thinking when this was announced or, leaked or whatever, I wonder if the idea of kind of pre-release hype, the idea of building up excitement is an idea that belongs in a vanished world. A physical product. Here's the thing that is going to happen. Here they are in the studio or whatever, and then it'll happen in 3 months' time or whatever it is. Start getting excited now. Whereas in this world nowadays, if I don't know, if Apple are going to release a new iPhone, they'll just do it. You know what I mean? It's just there. One day it's not there. Next day it is there.
Well, it's like that Taylor Swift album that dropped in lockdown, wasn't it? There was nothing, and then all of a sudden it had appeared, apropos of absolutely nothing.
Beyonce, all those things.
But what can you leak about it? Because the only thing you can really leak about it now is the sound of it. There's nothing more you can say about than the fact that the two of them are making a record. But you now need to hear little tiny bits of it, which they can't give you. So there isn't any way you can really kind of drip feed that information.
And here's the point, Mark. There's no reason why they can't give you that. The only reason they can't give you that is they don't want to.
Yeah.
It's because anything that's been done can be distributed worldwide in the next 5 minutes. It can be done. Really easiest thing in the world. Upload it to YouTube. Anywhere you can make anything available. Didn't used to be the case.
And also the problem is if you leak, even 10 or 15 seconds of this thing, everyone will then make their pronouncements to whether it's any good or not.
Well, but absolutely. See, because the truth of bands, it's always been this, is they love recording albums. They don't like putting them out. Because once they put them out, the verdict is in. And it comes in really quickly.
Well, it's
and they worry that it might not be favourable.
And psychologically, the womb-like interior of a studio, where you're safe from criticism, can carry on endlessly tinkering because you're just procrastinating, aren't you? You're just putting off the terrible moment when you've got to be judged.
I suppose if you spent months labouring this thing that you've completely convinced yourself is the greatest thing of all time, and then to have put out into the actual real world in which people actually live, and to be told that you're wrong, it must be devastating.
Oh, absolutely. Well, that's the fate of most albums, isn't it? Really, that's what happens. But we shall have to see in this case, Alex, to see if it is as you say, bound to be the greatest thing ever recorded. Or not.
It can't fail. It cannot fail.
Because it's funny when you said earlier that Noel Gallagher made a record with Ian Brown and everybody's forgotten. Is that what you said it is, isn't it?
They basically have, yeah. I thought.
You see, I think there are loads of those collaborations that people totally forget. I find this all the time. Say, oh, look, so-and-so's doing something with so-and-so. And somebody will say, well, actually, they did that 20 years ago. And you go and look and say, sure enough, they did, But
a lot of the time, that's just people getting together for one song, isn't it?
I suppose.
Yeah.
David Bowie or whatever.
Even McCartney playing on the Rolling Stones album, that kind of went, didn't it, in about 5 minutes? I mean...
Yeah. Well, it only gets...
But it wasn't a full record.
No, but it only gets interest at the time because it gives BBC News something to talk about long before the record comes out. Oh, and it features Paul McCartney or whatever, and everybody in the world goes, so what? Kind of thing. But if you're writing a news script, it's it's very worthwhile. So Danny Baker sent me this thing yesterday, Alex and Mark, of an extraordinary clip on YouTube of a young chap making the sound of Bob Dylan in the early 60s via his desktop. And it's quite an extraordinary little clip, isn't it, Alex? Can you explain what this guy is doing?
It's fantastic. What this guy's doing in a nutshell is emulating the essence of a Bob Dylan record by playing all the instruments himself on his laptop and singing over it in the style of Bob Dylan. It's all intents and purposes. He's creating a Bob Dylan record that Bob Dylan has absolutely no involvement in whatsoever. And there's a lot of people on the internet doing this at the moment, making records in the style of XXXXX, because, so how do I easily explain this?
He's not playing an instrument, is he? He's moving around little clips on his laptop, isn't he?
Well, he is, but he'll have a keyboard plugged in as well, at the very, very least.
But what he does, as far as I could see, was he blocks in. You see the kind of digital screen with all the bits of music kind of appearing, but he blocks in, doesn't he, on a keyboard, a series of chord sequence, and then he kind of reroutes it, so it develops a kind of shuffle. And then he adds a bass, and then he adds drums, and then he adds a little tiny electric piano figure. And very soon you start to hear that it sounds like something specifically off Blonde on Blonde, isn't it? It's that kind of locomotive kind of Dylan slight shuffle beat that he invented, the wild Mercury sound or whatever he called it. And then he comes in at the end, doesn't he, and sings that brilliant lyric about, I went to the doctor and I told him I was sick. He said, I could fix you up and it'll cost you about 6. And I said, 100 or 1,000. He said, don't be so naive. So I picked up my sack and now it's time to leave. He's just making up this just nonsense. It also looks like Dylan, doesn't he, with his shades on.
He's wearing shades, yeah.
It's just superb. But isn't that what he's doing? He's just broadly getting the kind of vague colour of what the Dylan backbeat sounds like.
Well, yeah, the great thing about any half-decent computer these days is they'll have some kind of music creating software on them. So I've got a Mac and I use Logic. I used GarageBand before, which is basically the same thing. And what these things act as is A, a mobile studio, B, an instrument bank, and C, a specific branded instrument bank. So basically you can use your interface like an instrument. So everything is on a grid and you can use your laptop keyboard, if you have no other keyboard available, to play notes, snap them to a particular point on that grid, replicate them, move them around, create chords, create movements, create phrases, bars and passages. But you can also have a load of things that are called plugins. And what plugins are essentially are sound banks of very specific instruments. So for example, there's an Abbey Road instruments plugin now where you can play the Lady Madonna piano. It's all been sampled. It's as legit as you'll ever get. Outside of Studio 2. So if you know an artist well enough to emulate their playing style, you can also emulate their sound by virtue of your digital instrument plugins, which make whatever you're playing sound like the instrument you want it to be played on. So there'll be a Hofner bass plugin as well. And as far as the drums go, a lot of this software has something called a smart drummer, which basically it's a loop that is sensitive to the music that's being played around it, and changes and alters, and you can and pushes and pulls like a real drummer will. It's basically an AI drummer that is intelligent enough to react to whatever else is being played around it. It's phenomenal. It really, really is. So he's using all that to create this super sounds, the piano, the bass, the drums, whatever else. To create a record that sounds like it came off Blonde and Blonde.
How dispiriting to be a real drummer and hear that there's a machine that's intelligent enough to react to all that's going on around it. It's like an extension of the old drummer jokes, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's 2020.
So do you sit at home doing this, Alex?
Yeah, I do. I've done quite a bit of it. I think it's brilliant. And it's completely changed my attitude to writing stuff, because no longer do you have to just sit in a room with a guitar or piano and just wait for something to happen to your head. You can methodically build a piece of music piece by piece, and just like you can delete words off a Word document as you're typing it, you can delete anything you don't like and pop something else in instead. So nothing's forever, nothing's sacred, nothing's permanent. Everything is eminently changeable, and that makes the whole process, I think, a lot more fluid. And the possibilities are endless to have all these sounds available to you instantly, whereas 20 years ago, you'd have to pay 300 quid to go into a studio that may or may not have half of the instruments you probably want it to play. You've got the world's sound bank at your fingertips. There's never been a better time to make music, I don't think. And you're seeing all kinds of this stuff pop up on the internet. Smart young things just having this resource available to them to do something amazing with it. And I think it's completely changed the way people are writing music in general or approaching music composition.
That should make the process faster, but by having such a variety of options to choose from, doesn't it also make it slower? Because you must
nothing makes the golden rule about all technology, and this applies absolutely in film, in journalism, in writing, in music or whatever, is it never makes things quicker. Never.
I don't know.
Because it provides you with more options.
More options.
No. You see,
we ought to just hear it with this particular colour tone and this sound, this little kind of treatment, because it might make all the difference.
That's where the discipline, the discipline comes in. There's an old adage that says, "A mix is never finished; it's merely abandoned," and you have to teach yourself when to walk away.
Yeah.
But I think it has made.
However, generally speaking, Alex, go back to the 1950s and 60s. Records were made quicker. They just were. Why? Why were they made quicker? It was more laborious to make them in those days. They ought to be made more slowly. But no, they were made quicker. Nowadays, things are laboured over endlessly before they're put out. Nothing's done quicker.
I don't think it's necessarily that. It's the recording style as well. So in the 50s and 60s, you had a band in a room playing at the same time with a very limited number of microphones. Whereas now, most ensemble recordings, you have your parts recording separately. I was once in a session where the drums, they recorded the drums first and taped over the cymbals, so the drummer could still hit them, but they wouldn't be heard. And then they had to go back and they silenced the drums, but you could still hit them, but you wouldn't hear them. But the cymbals were mic'd up. And I think that's what the Arctic Monkeys and Queens of the Stone Age do. And the idea is by negating the drums, all the cymbals, you are able to focus on that frequency and get a bigger sound out of it. But basically everything is laboured over. Everything is done separately. And that's why records are made slower. But in terms of getting an idea from the start point to the finish point, it's never been quicker, I don't think. Because, okay, so say you're a professional songwriter and you need to put something together for a TV brief or whatever. You've got some kind of remit. You can go into your little, office room or whatever, open your laptop up, and you'll know exactly what kinds of sounds you need to choose from. You can lay something.
Isn't that a different thing? You're being given a brief and said, write X minutes of music to this brief. And I need it on Tuesday. I think we're talking about people sitting down here and waiting for the muse to visit them and coming up with something entirely creative, off a blank sheet of paper. That could take forever if you have all those options.
Yeah, it could. It's just interesting. The contrast I always come back to is the difference between, and we were talking about this the other day. You and I, Mark, began our working lives as journalists in the days of the typewriter. The typewriter, where you got a sheet of white paper and you rolled it in there, and you had sat there looking at the white sheet of paper for half an hour before you wrote anything at all.
Yeah, because you knew if you typed something up and it changed your mind, you'd have to probably start all over again.
Absolutely, and you might not have that much paper. And Mark Ellen, Alex, I would tell you this, Mark Ellen was such a consumer of Tipex, which was the kind of liquid correction paper, that they used to say that Mark's copy used to rock on the desk.
It would be solid. If you try and flatten it, great chunks of Tipex would break off like plaster.
Whereas once you move on to the word processor, and nowadays, people put things on a screen and then they put other things with them and other things, and then they move the thing that was first and make it fourth and whatever. And they just pile stuff in there in the hope that it eventually just clicks into some kind of shape. And what we're all doing when we do this, journalists, musicians or whatever, is we're fooling ourselves.
Completely.
We're trying to make things easier for ourselves. We're fooling ourselves.
Because before we'd sit down and write that longhand before we typed it out.
Do you know what is the most creative act anybody can do? I've just made this up. Full of the confidence of being a winner on University Challenge.
Yeah, go on.
Okay, here it is. And I don't care if you're a painter or a musician or a writer or whatever, go for a walk round the block. Go for a walk round the block, because going for a walk round the block will, the physical movement will put blood in your, to your head, and you'll think about things. And you're likely to come back from that walk with an idea of what you should write down or what you should sing or whatever. You're more likely to get that kind of idea away from the tools of implementing that idea than you are sitting in your keyboard or your desk. That's my theory. What do you think?
I think you're absolutely right, actually. I think there's a lot to be said for letting the subconscious work at it as well. The idea will be there. You just need a bit of space to be able to let it gestate. But it's just occurred to me that I think the big thing that these digital interfaces have done in terms of creating music and allowing it to be created quicker is they've shifted the focus of songwriting from melody and form to texture. If you listen to a lot of records that are made now, you'll hear a lot of stuff that's broadly looped from the core is broadly looped from start to finish, but they use texture and timbre to differentiate parts. So you won't write a bridge and a chorus in the middle eight. You'll have one chord sequence running all the way through, and you'll be using different sounds to give it ebb and flow.
That's a dance music format, really, isn't it? Rather than the songwriting format.
No, I think it's becoming increasingly popular in guitar.
No, but Mark's saying that's where it came from.
That's where it came from.
Oh, yeah.
You have the 16 beats, and because dance music basically is the same 16 beats or whatever, and occasionally you have a drop section where it's quiet, occasionally you have something where it's louder, which is just a way of manipulating people on a dance floor. But it's a totally different form of logic to intro, verse, chorus, bridge, verse, chorus, outro, solo, out. You know what I mean? It's just the opposite thing.
Going back to our friend with making the Bob Dylan record in his bedroom, the one missing ingredient is Bob Dylan.
It's Bob Dylan, yeah.
So Bob Dylan will be the first one to say, no, don't play it like that. Just try it a bit slower or whatever, And the thing about Bob Dylan records is they kind of wander a bit. They're not. And the key expression you used earlier, which I think is so interesting in all these things, is snapping to the grid. Snapping to the grid is obviously a computer term, and I can remember seeing this. I can remember first seeing this on what we used to call desktop publishing. When designers first started doing layouts on a screen, and they could get the text roughly lined up, and then you just click, and it would snap to the grid. It would just move, and that assumes that there is a perfect place for something, and that behind whatever the work you're doing is, there is a grid. There is an ideal solution, and the computer will always seek the ideal solution. And so you take the same thing into music, that's what happened. Whereas if it's Bob Dylan in the studio with a bass player and a drummer, it's not like that at all. There is no idea.
Absolutely. And here's the thing. So before you start any session on your digital studio computer thing, interface, whatever, you'll set a tempo, and that tempo will preside for the whole track. And I saw this thing a little while ago, and it was an analysis of various hits from through the decades. And the one consistent thing was how they all moved. The tempo always moved, and it didn't matter who was playing. So there was a Police record. And, Stuart Copeland is probably one of the most metronomic drummers of all time. And this Police record, I can't remember what it was. It might have been Roxanne, actually. I think it fluctuated by about 15 BPM from start to finish. And that just doesn't happen anymore. And you could argue that, that fluctuation is the human element of the music.
Absolutely. I'm sure that's
its
true.
Character.
I think you'd missed that.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true. So, well, look, we should let you get on, Alex, and you go to bed in Portland, Oregon. That's what you should do at this time. Whereas Mark and I have got to go out and, we've got to keep the economy going so that the likes of you can just bugger off. Bugger off. Is there anything we need to remind the listeners of if they're not already a Patreon supporter and they may care to consider doing this as the new year starts, and if they want to do that,
Friday night quiz,
to take part in the Friday night quiz, and to get priority access to these podcasts and anything else that we do, where would people find details of how to do that, Alex?
People need to open their computer up first of all and log on to the internet, and then type
Snap
in snap to the grid www.patreon.com/word in your ear.
This podcast was brought to you by The Word.